it was a great movie, but it seemed like there was resistance to that movie.
Mel Gibson was on the Joe Rogan podcast talking about the sequel to The Passion of the Christ.
When Mel Gibson sat down with Joe Rogan, something extraordinary happened. The conversation started casually enough, touching on filmmaking, faith, and Hollywood politics. But then Gibson began revealing what really happened behind the scenes of The Passion of the Christ. And suddenly, the room went still. Rogan, a man who has interviewed presidents, fighters, and whistleblowers, was visibly shaken. This wasn't marketing. This wasn't controversy for clicks. Gibson was pulling back a curtain that Hollywood had fought desperately to keep closed. And once you understand what everyone missed about this film, you'll never see it the same way again. The story nobody wanted told to understand what Gibson exposed. We need to go back to the beginning. The Passion of the Christ was never meant to be just another biblical epic. Gibson wasn't interested in sweeping cinematography and predictable storytelling. He wanted something raw, something visceral, something that would grab audiences by the throat and refuse to let go until they truly understood what sacrifice actually means. It was like, you're making this film and the idea was that we're all responsible for this, that his sacrifice was for all mankind. As Gibson explained to Rogan, the entire point was that we're all responsible for this. That Christ's sacrifice wasn't just a historical event, but something with present-day implications for every single person watching. He spent years studying the four Gospels, diving into every verse about the final hours of Jesus Christ's life. But he went deeper than most filmmakers would dare. He pulled from ancient texts and theological sources, weaving together not just the events themselves, but the weight behind them, the spiritual warfare, the human cost, the divine purpose hidden within every moment of suffering. The opening scene tells you exactly what kind of film this is. We're in the Garden of Gethsemane. Darkness pressing in. Jesus kneeling in prayer while his closest companions fall, asleep around him. The vulnerability is overwhelming. Here is someone fully divine yet fully human, sweating drops of blood as an unbearable weight crushes down upon him. Then Satan appears, slithering through shadows, whispering doubts. A serpent emerges, but Jesus crushes it beneath his heel. A direct callback to Genesis and the very first promise of redemption. Every single frame carries meaning. Every shadow is deliberate. Every line of dialogue resonates with theological depth that rewards those paying close attention. This wasn't a film designed for casual viewing. Gibson created cinema that demands you lean forward, engage deeply, and reckon with something far larger than yourself. What Hollywood tried to bury. During his conversation with Rogan, Gibson revealed something that most people never talk about openly. Something that explains why this film faced such extraordinary resistance from the very beginning. He noticed a pattern within the industry, a double standard that operated silently but effectively. Films exploring various religious traditions often received respectful treatment, nuanced portrayals, careful handling. But when it came to Christian stories, the response was fundamentally different. Skepticism, dismissal, sometimes outright hostility. Christianity is the one religion that you're allowed to disparage. Yeah. Christianity is the one religion where they'll embrace all these different religions until it comes to Christianity. Projects were labeled old-fashioned, too serious, out of touch with modern audiences. The assumption was always that nobody wanted to see this kind of content anymore. Gibson experienced this resistance personally and painfully. Studios that should have been fighting to finance a project from an Oscar-winning director suddenly went cold. Phone calls went unanswered. Meetings were canceled. Colleagues who had worked alongside him for years started keeping their distance. The message couldn't have been clearer. This particular story wasn't welcome, and neither was the filmmaker trying to tell it. The industry didn't just doubt the commercial viability. They actively opposed the content itself. But Gibson refused to walk away. His Catholic upbringing meant this wasn't just professional ambition, it was personal mission. When traditional funding dried up, he financed the project himself. He assembled a team of believers who shared his vision and weren't intimidated by controversy. What emerged from that crucible of opposition shocked everyone. The Passion of the Christ became one of the highest-grossing R-rated films in history, proving that millions of viewers were starving for exactly the kind of bold, uncompromising storytelling that Hollywood executives insisted nobody wanted. Supernatural events that defied explanation. The making of this film was anything but ordinary. What Gibson shared with Rogan moved into territory that sounds almost impossible to believe. Events occurred on set that the crew still cannot explain to this day. Jim Caviezel, cast as Jesus, endured genuine physical suffering that translated to the screen in ways no special effects could replicate. The cross he carried weighed over 30 pounds. During one take, it dislocated his shoulder completely. During the scourging scene, he was struck twice by the actual whips. Once so hard it knocked the wind from his lungs, leaving his hands bleeding and raw. His pain wasn't performance. It was absolutely real, and that authenticity bleeds through every frame of the finished film. Then came the lightning. Assistant director John Michelini was struck twice during filming. Caviezel himself was reportedly struck during the crucifixion scene, yet walked away miraculously unharmed. The Passion, While I Was Electric, struck by lightning on the last shot of the movie, but prior to that, it was shoulder dislocation. Lightning in biblical tradition represents divine power and judgment. It appears at pivotal moments throughout Scripture. The crew couldn't explain what was happening around them. These incidents created an atmosphere where the boundary between natural and supernatural felt dangerously thin. People started wondering if something beyond ordinary filmmaking was taking place. Transformations extended beyond the physical realm. Luca Lionel, who portrayed Judas Iscariot, entered production as an atheist. By the time filming wrapped, he had become a believer, profoundly changed by spending months exploring themes of betrayal and redemption. Maya Morgan-Stern, who played Mary, was secretly pregnant during filming. A quiet symbol of life and death, resurrection and renewal, intertwined with the very story she was helping tell. Gibson also shared reports of unexplained healings. A young girl with severe epilepsy went an entire month without seizures after being present during filming. Others reportedly experienced restored senses. Whether these were divine interventions, remarkable coincidences, or psychological transformations, the cast and crew walked away convinced they had participated in something far greater than a movie production. One scene perfectly captures Gibson's artistic vision. After the crucifixion, Jesus' body rests in Mary's arms, echoing Michelangelo's famous Pieta. The composition captures grief and grace simultaneously, devastation and dignity, human sorrow and divine purpose. It transcends religious tradition to speak to universal experiences of love, loss, and hope. Critics divided, audiences transformed. When The Passion of the Christ finally reached theaters, critical response was sharply divided. Roger Ebert, arguably the most influential film critic of his generation, awarded it a perfect 4 stars, calling it the most violent and intense film he had ever witnessed. Ebert wrote that he had never truly understood the depth of Christ's suffering until experiencing Gibson's unflinching portrayal. Roger Ebert, as much as he loved to praise and celebrate good films, he also loved to point out their flaws. Other respected critics praised the film's sincerity and artistic ambition, comparing Gibson's directorial vision to masters of spiritual cinema. Yet, controversy arrived from multiple directions. Before the film's release, religious leaders reviewed the script and expressed serious concerns. They worried that certain portrayals could reinforce dangerous historical stereotypes that had fueled anti-Semitism for centuries. These weren't frivolous objections. History showed how such narratives had been weaponized to justify persecution and violence. Gibson maintained that his intent was to show humanity's collective responsibility for Christ's death, not to single out any group, but the debate highlighted how fraught any retelling of this story inevitably becomes. Scholars noted that Gibson included scenes without direct biblical basis, like Judas tormented by demonic children. Gibson's response was straightforward. This was artistic interpretation meant to convey spiritual truths, not documentary recreation. He used cinematic language, symbolism, and visual metaphor to explore themes of guilt, redemption, and spiritual warfare. The film walked a tightrope between historical representation and theological meditation. Different viewers brought radically different expectations and left with radically different experiences. Some found it spiritually transformative, others found it problematic. Almost nobody walked away neutral. The intensity of debate only amplified public interest. People who would never normally consider religious films felt compelled to judge for themselves. Church groups organized mass viewings. Religious leaders delivered sermons analyzing its implications. Media outlets ran countless stories dissecting every frame. Gibson had created something that absolutely refused to be ignored. The Resurrection Project Gibson isn't finished exploring these themes. In fact, he's only getting started. During his interview with Rogan, he revealed that for 6 to 7 years, he and screenwriter Randall Wallace have been developing something even more ambitious. A film about the resurrection, told not through conventional linear storytelling, but as a cosmic exploration of the eternal battle between good and evil. Gibson described the project as incredibly ambitious. It spans from the fall of the angels to the death of the last apostle. This isn't a simple sequel. It's an expansion into territory that mainstream cinema has never truly attempted. Gibson wants to show how that singular moment in history, the resurrection, connects to everything before and after. He's diving into ancient texts, theological debates, and historical research to craft a narrative that challenges audiences to see familiar stories through entirely new eyes. For him, the Gospels aren't mythology. They're history evidenced by the unwavering testimony of the apostles, all of whom died, rather than deny what they witnessed. As Gibson asked Rogan directly, who dies for something they know is a lie? That question alone, he believes, validates the supernatural claims at the very heart of Christianity. The resurrection remains the most challenging aspect of faith for many people. Someone executed, buried, and then walking out of a tomb defies the natural order completely. Gibson admits that for much of his life, he accepted these claims because others believed them. But over time, he sought his own understanding. That personal journey now shapes everything he creates. He isn't interested in preaching to the converted or producing content that confirms existing beliefs. He wants skeptics and believers alike to wrestle with profound questions about existence, meaning, and what happens when life ends. What everyone missed. So, what's the hidden truth that shook Joe Rogan? What brought visible emotion to a man known for his composure? It wasn't a single revelation. It was the weight of everything combined. The truth that creating the Passion of the Christ required Gibson to stand virtually alone against an industry that wanted this story buried forever. The truth that supernatural events occurred during filming that defy any rational explanation. The truth that art created with genuine conviction can transform lives in ways commercial entertainment never will. The truth that faith sometimes demands suffering. That speaking honestly means risking everything you've built. That some stories justify any sacrifice required to tell them. These truths cut through the noise of our cynical age. They reminded Rogan and his millions of listeners that sincerity still exists in a world dominated by calculation and image management, that people still create art for reasons beyond profit, that conviction still moves mountains, and that sometimes the most controversial stories are exactly the ones most desperately needing to be heard. Gibson's journey represents something increasingly rare, a complete refusal to compromise, a refusal to play it safe, a refusal to let industry gatekeepers dictate which stories deserve telling and which should be silenced forever. The Passion of the Christ forces viewers to confront uncomfortable realities about suffering, sacrifice, and redemption. It offers no easy answers or comfortable reassurances. Instead, it demands that we wrestle with difficult questions about human nature, divine purpose, and the price of salvation. Questions most entertainment actively avoids. More than 2 decades after its release, the film remains divisive. Some view it as an absolute masterpiece of spiritual cinema. Others see it as deeply problematic. Both perspectives contain elements of validity. Great art provokes strong reactions precisely because it touches something deep within us, something we cannot easily dismiss or categorize. The conversation between Gibson and Rogan revealed layers of truth that most celebrity interviews never even approach. It showed us that behind every controversial work lies a human story of struggle, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to vision. It reminded us that reality contains mysteries we cannot fully explain through materialist frameworks. And it demonstrated that authentic vulnerability, even from tough and controversial figures, holds genuine power to move hearts and open minds. That's what everyone missed about the Passion of the Christ. It wasn't just a movie. It was a man betting everything on a story the world tried to silence and winning. The hidden truth isn't hidden anymore. It's there for anyone willing to look, to listen, and to let themselves be transformed by stories that actually matter. Stories that cost something real. Stories that change everything.